Hello, everybody. Welcome to Neuroscience 416 Neural Development. I'm Mark Breedlove. I'm the instructor for this class, and we have a graduate teaching assistant, Antonio, who is there in the corner, also known as Tone. Tone the neuroscientist for podcast fans, but you can check him out. You'll get to hear more from him later, not today, but in the future. We both happy to meet with you, office hours, but by appointment. And so email us and we can make an appointment either in person or remote, whichever works best for you. There's another familiar face. Most of the faces aren't familiar. Noah? Okay, yeah. So the other class I teach, the other undergraduate class to teach is Neuroscience 310, which is human sexuality. And that'll be next fall. So if you're still going to be here and are interested, you can check it out. This class is one that tackles a pretty big problem that mankind has, tried to understand. And I think that it at least rivals the moonshot, right, in terms of what has been achieved. Because you're going to see that I'll be able to tell you we have a pretty good solution to the problem. Well, what's the problem? Put your fingers and thumbs together like that and make a little opening between them, and then look up at a light and make that opening as small as you can and still see the light, right? You were once a cell about that size, the fertilized egg, the zygote. And that cell divided and divided and divided and eventually made, between your ears, as far as we know, the most complicated machine in the universe. Does that strike you as a worthy problem to try to understand? And the first thing you'll have to admit is it simply isn't possible. You did. Oh, wait, but here we are. And it's, to me at least, it's astonishing that in broad strokes, we actually understand now how that can happen. Plenty of details that we don't know, some that we're probably never going to know. But for the most part, I hope to give you that perspective to understand how that is possible and what the steps were that made it possible. Steps in terms of development and steps in terms of evolution. Because it'll turn out it's no coincidence that the most complicated behaviors, the species showing the most complicated behaviors on this planet are the mammals and the birds, and they just happen to be the ones that have extensive parental care. In fact, obligatory parental care for the most part. And so eventually, I want to give you that perspective. And we'll talk a lot about genes and experience, and in some ways, you've heard of the nature-nurture debate, whether what you are is a result of how you were raised or what genes you happen to get. And the answer is yes. And what drives me crazy about the nature-nurture debate is repeatedly certainly for the last 200 years, people have understood why that's a dumb question. To ask whether it is nature or it is nurture, or even to ask how much of it is nature and how much of it is nurture. Because it's all nature and it's all nurture. But people say stuff like that, and there's no way for you to get a grasp of what that means. In the course of this course, you're going to understand how it simply is not possible to build a nervous system, certainly not one like yours, without extensive experience. And it doesn't matter which genes you get, which is not to deny that it is not possible to make a nervous system as complicated as yours is without pretty much all of those 20,000 genes working more or less well. So I hope that eventually you understand why the nature-nurture debate is a stupid debate. Why it's right. Don't just take my word for it. By the time this is over, you ought to understand why that's the case. And by the way, none of your fellow citizens have any idea. Some of them think that, genes are everything, and some of them think that genes are nothing, and they're both equally wrong, and they represent the majority of your citizens. One camp or the other. But at least I hope you will do better. a little bit about myself. So I came to MSU in 2001, so I've been here for 23 years now. Before that, I was a professor in the psychology department at the University of California, Berkeley for 20 years. So I've been doing this professor thing quite a bit. I've professed many, many hours, in fact, and I teach this course. I developed this course because I wanted to teach it and because I love this material, and you'll see that I love this material. Right? It's fascinating. And I wish I knew it all, and I certainly don't, but hopefully I know more than you do yet. And we'll be able to help you with some of it. At Berkeley, being there for 20 years, it is a tradition at Berkeley that people often call their instructors by first names. And having grown up in that environment, it really makes me uncomfortable when people say Professor Breedlove, right? If you do, I'll be fine. But it's fine with me if you call me Mark. All my emails to you are going to be ending with Mark, etc. I'm totally an informal guy, but I got to warn you, not all your professors may feel that way. So at MSU, I think most professors feel like it's disrespectful if you don't call them doctor or professor, okay? But I'm okay with that. I'm a first-generation student. No one in my family went to college before I did. I'm from the Ozarks of southern Missouri. My first 10 years, I grew up on a farm. I was raised by my grandparents, complicated story, who never went to middle school, right? I mean, one time they told me that all put together, they thought they maybe went through third grade, right? They were incredibly smart, right? And my grandfather read extensively, right? But they had no formal education. And I have no idea quite how I got here. I can tell you there was a lot of accidents and a lot of good luck. But if I came into the world with any talent for this business, it's simply that I like to read. Also, growing up on a farm, I became fascinated with animals apparently before I could even remember, before I could even talk. One of the things I would do was toddle around on the farm with an empty coffee can, gathering bugs to put them in there. And I can tell you, I don't remember learning that wasps sting and dirt daubers don't and all that stuff, but I must have learned it, right? Brute experience. And so I talk about being a first-generation student. I've started this last few years just to point out that in this audience, there will be other first-generation students. And it is a peculiarity of that group of people, of which I was one, which is, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand to tell me if you're a first-generation student, because no matter what other people say, there's still a little bit of stigma if your parents didn't go to college, right? We are such a class-conscious society in the United States, right? That it's not always easy to know or to recognize other people are first-generation students. And some of you may be wondering, should you be here? So I'm here to tell you, you absolutely belong. And you bring with you certain advantages that those people whose parents went to college don't, in terms of self-reliance and in terms of knowing that, you could make your own way. In fact, I'm going to predict college is going to be great for you, right? You especially. Question about any of that? Okay, scary. So I told you I developed this course, and part of developing this course, in doing it, I looked at all the textbooks that were out there and I hated them all. They were absolutely incomprehensible. I don't know how anyone could get anything from them. It was astonishing. It's such great material. And the textbooks that are out there, they were written by people, and you kind of got the impression that the main thing they wanted to get across was not the information, but they wanted to make sure you knew they were smart, right? So use long words whenever you can, and complicated sentence structure whenever you can, because that proves that you're, stodgy and academic, and you must be really smart, right? So I hated that. So I wrote this textbook, and I was just telling Dawn, I'm so ticked that I revised this textbook. There's a second edition, right? I finished it months ago, but the publisher, they're taking forever to do their part. So the second edition is going to be ready about a month from now, which is like, oh, okay. couldn't you guys have sped it up a little bit more? And I won't teach this course again until 2 years from now. So by then it's out of date already, right? So anyway, so we're going to use the first edition, and we're going to read electronic copy, more about that in a moment. But the new chapter I wrote for the second edition is on hormonally guided neural development, which takes part of what's in your chapter 7 and some new material. And so when we get there, I'll post a PDF of the new chapter there and ask you to read that. Okay. So, question. Okay. Don't buy a hard copy. I mean, I love the book, but I don't want you to buy a hard copy because you're going to be reading an ebook version of it. So those of you who were in human sexuality last time know about this. I use a software called Perusall that lets you access an electronic copy of the book. And the software, after everyone's bought their copy of the book, it will arrange you at random into reading pods. I got to decide, maybe 9 or 10 people. And you will be reading through the book, making comments, answering questions, asking questions, responding to each other as you go through the chapter. And Perusall is going to give you a score of how engaged you are. I don't know what the algorithm is, but whatever it is, you can figure it out, because it's going to give you a score of 0, 1, 2, or 3. And we'll talk some more about that. But your job for the first chapter is to figure out how to get a 3. I've set it such that you can see what your score is at any one time, right? And the idea behind it, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to capture the, whatever it is that makes everyone swarm to Facebook and other social media apps, to try to tap into that to help you be engaged in it. And one of the things I'm going to do to help that is that a couple of times in class, I'm going to have you break and meet with your reading pod, so you actually get to have faces to associate with the name. Okay? Something I didn't do in 310. Want to do this time. Now, so the bad news is you're going to have to buy a textbook for this course. I know many people don't buy the textbooks for the course, and I understand why they're expensive. But the bad news is for this course, you have to. The good news is it's $65, so it's not terribly expensive. The other bad news is you're not going to resell it afterwards, right? So to access the text, you go to the D2L site, and I'll show you that. But wait a minute. I wrote the textbook. When you buy an electronic copy, they send me a royalty. Oh, well, that sounds like a conflict of interest to me. You get the royalties and you make your students buy it, not only assign it to them, but make them buy a copy. That's not right. And I agree. So for each $65 that you spend for electronic copy, eventually they would send me $6.30. Right? Yes, I get slightly less than 10% of what you paid for it, even though I swear to you, I wrote every word. Anyway, so what I'll do to make sure you know that I'm not doing this for the money. And by the way, don't ever write a textbook for money. I've written 4 of them now. For 2 of them, I don't think I made minimum wage. Actually, and I'm not sure I have made minimum wage on this yet either. Anyway, but to prove to you I'm not assigning it that way, I need you now to tell me what charity I should donate my share of the royalties to. Ideas? Anyone got a favorite royalty charity? Yeah. I'm fine with that. Any other nominees?
Habitat for Humanity.
What?
Habitat for Humanity.
I still couldn't hear.
Habitat for.
Oh, Habitat for Humanity. There's a Lansing version of that. Any other? And in the past, that's what we're. Any other? Okay. How many want to go for American Cancer Society? Oh. How many want to go for Habitat for Humanity? Oh, I don't want to count. You don't get to vote twice. I think American Cancer Society does that. All right. So once I know how many people bought the book, I'll multiply that by $6.30. I'll make a donation to the American Cancer Society, and I'll dedicate it to you, and I'll post it on the D2L site. Okay? So, good. Thanks. Okay, now more about perusal. So, the way to purchase the book, you have to go through to our D2L site. So go to our D2L site, find the perusal tab, click there, and then click on the link that's there. It'll take you to the perusal site, and that's where you give your credit card information and pay your $65. Warning, they sometimes put the default being that you want access to the book for a year, and they charge you like $180 for that. Don't do that. What you want is the 180-day, the shortest term. That's what costs $65. And that's more than enough time to be done with this course, okay? So, and if you run into any problems, let me know. Yeah. And only purchase it. Don't go to the perusal.com and purchase it there. Hit our D2L link and purchase it there. Questions about that so far? Okay, so when you go there, also on the D2L site, I put a link to Perusal, their information about how their algorithm works, how they give you a 1, 2, or 3. And believe me, you can figure out what to do, right? You will have to post a certain number of comments, etc., and they'll grade the comments. I don't know how. It's proprietary, the algorithm. But you'll figure it out. And for each assignment, you'll be rated 0 through 3. The first assignment, the prologue in chapter 1, I'm not going to count it, right? But your job is to figure out how to get a 3. Okay? So make comments, look to see what your score is. If it's not a 3 yet, go back and figure out what to do next, right? And then after that, there'll be 9 more assignments. So you could have a total of 27 points total. I want you to get 20 for the other 9 assignments. And that means for some of them, you got to get a 3. So figure out how to get a 3. If you don't get at least 20 points, then I'm going to reduce your grade by 1 notch, like from a 4 point to a 3.5. So this is a participation credit. I don't think you'll find it isn't difficult to do, but, and all the assignments are already listed. When you go through our D2L site, you'll see all the assignments and the chapters, including the due dates. Keep an eye on those, and you don't fall behind. How's that? Okay. Oh, and someone pointed out to me on the perusal site, sometimes there's a red exclamation point next to your score. Ignore it. Doesn't mean anything. It's a matter. It just means the software isn't syncing into the D2L gradebook, but I don't use the D2L gradebook, so it's of no consequence, okay? Once you get your 3, you're gold. You can still read the book some more, but don't delete any of your posts or anything. You don't want to reduce your score. How are you doing? You're making me nervous. Nobody's asking questions. Okay. And yeah. And I got to say, what I love about it is that and this is like the 4th time I've used this software. And I think people actually read the book, which is not, in my experience, ordinarily. Your grade then will be based on, assuming you get your participation credit, will be based on some multiple choice exams. In the course of the semester, you'll have 4 multiple choice exams, 3 midterms and a final. Okay. And that's more midterms than I've had in the past because I keep hearing that people want more feedback and earlier feedback. So the dates for the 3 midterms are all listed in D2L. Pay attention to that calendar there. And I'm trying something different with the tests this time. First of all, they'll all be done remotely on D2L. And instead of taking class time to have you take the D2L exam during this class period, I'm trying something different, which is on each of the weekends that we have a midterm, I'll make it available to you starting at noon on Friday and closing midnight on Sunday. Each exam, you get 90 minutes. So at some point during that weekend, you'll have to put aside 90 minutes to take the exam. Once you start the exam, you have to finish in 90 minutes. And it's 100 multiple choice questions. In 90 minutes, if you don't know the material, I mean, basically, essentially, it's open book, right? But if you don't, if you're having to look up all 100 questions, you're not going to make it, right? You better have a pretty good idea of the material in the first place. Also, the way I give the exam is each of you will get a random mix of questions, and you get 10 questions at a time. And only after you answer those 10 questions can you get the next slug of 10 questions. This means you got to pay careful attention to your time, right? Don't take 80 minutes on the first slug of 10 questions, that idea. And once you've submitted one slug of 10 questions, you can't go back. Now, that's a fairly complicated procedure. And so that to make sure everyone understands it, I put a pretest on there, which you can see right now. Some of you have already taken it, in fact. And the pretest will not count towards your grade. It's a half exam, 50 questions, and you get 45 minutes to do it, right? And I don't want you to study for it. I don't want you to look anything up. I want you to answer the question. I mean, do the best you can, make your best guess, and see how it comes out. No matter how many you get right or wrong, won't have any influence on your grade. But it does tell me how much you know about this material already. And I can tell you that in the past on these pretests, the class on average scores just a little bit better than you expect by chance alone. Okay. And somehow, by the time you're done with the class, the average score is going to be about 80% of them right. Will be, so you also get to see that you're learning stuff. Questions about that? And I've set a deadline asking you to please take this test in the next couple of weeks. Oops, there it is. So that's so there are the dates. Those are the dates. Those are the weekends. And, but the final exam, you don't have that much. The final exam you have to take during the slot that's been allotted to us. Okay. So that one you will want to start at 10 a.m. on December 11th. Okay. And here's about the pretest, but I already told you that. So the best reason to take the pretest is so that you understand the format and you'll be ready for the exams. And did I say that the grading will be, the same old grading that you had before? If your average on the 4 exams is 90, you get a 4 point. If it's 65, you get 1.5, etc. Everyone's familiar with that scale, right? So, assuming you get your perusal participation score. But there's another participation requirement of this class, and that are the Kahoot quizzes. So I will try to have at least one Kahoot quiz every lecture. Sometimes there's 2. And I don't care if you get them right or wrong, right? You don't have to answer the questions correctly, but you do have to answer. And we'll give an example here in a moment. And so if you are going to be absent because you're not feeling well or, stuff happens, flat tires, stuff like that, that's okay. Email me either before or during class, and 2 things will happen. Number 1, I won't let any missed Kahoots count against you. And number 2, I'll send you a link to a recording of the lecture that day, right? So that you don't fall behind. If you miss more than half the Kahoots, then you're not here and you fail the class. If you are here for at least 3/4 of the Kahoots, you're gold. If you're here for less than 75% of the Kahoots, then I'm going to reduce your grade 1 notch. So let's not do it, right? Question about that? Yeah, good.
How many uses we get here?
It depends on how many bad things happen to you. No, I mean, after the COVID pandemic and long COVID and stuff like that, I mean, stuff happens. So I hope it doesn't to any of you. But if you have that many things that go wrong, at least I'll know in this class, you'll still have access to the lectures if the gods of audiovisual equipment shine on me. And so you should be okay. I don't want you to come, that's the next slide. I don't want you to come to class sick. If you're sick, stay home. Take care of yourself, right? And then email me before or during class. And at the end of the day, when I render the video for the lecture, I'll send you a link so you can keep up with it. Okay? I said all that stuff. And that means you got to be here. Okay. And yeah, I always try to make a point of this too. It's in the syllabus. Yes, good.
You post the videos more we could
I don't post the videos for everyone. No. I mean, I thought about that, but I want you to come here. My scar from the pandemic is teaching. Actually, it was this class. Teaching it entirely remotely was the most miserable experience of my life. And I think the students were more miserable than I was. So no, I want to have human beings in front of me. I'm sorry. It's selfish, but I want you to be here, even though it's way out at the wrong end of campus. And this week is too hot. Mental health. College is stressful. Those of you who know about schizophrenia, for most people, their first schizophrenic break happens like in young adulthood. And for many people, it's that freshman year of college that sort of like pushes them over the edge, it appears. It's stressful. You have to take care of yourself. This is what you should do, right? Take care of you. And if you need someone to talk to, the campus offers services for that. And don't wait, right? Seek them out. And again, to tell you, to encourage you to do this, I can tell you that several times in my life, I've sought out counseling. And I really felt like I benefited from it. Okay? So it's not a sign of weakness. If you're seeing somebody, it's a sign of being grown up and self-care and looking after yourself and being a responsible adult, right? You're not helping our society if you let yourself get really sick. All right? Questions about that? Today after class, when you're on the street and people are walking towards you, you need to stop them and point out that you won a blow pop today. You can show them the wrapper. Most people stick the thing right in their mouth during class, which is fine with me. But okay, so stakes are high. Questions about the mechanics of this course, the plumbing, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. Yeah, good, Laura.
So last semester you posted the lecture videos online. This semester you're not going to post.
Did I? Well, my inclination, I don't know. I don't know. Let's wait and see how it goes. I've done it both ways, and it's honestly, I don't want to make it too easy for you not to come to class. Yeah, but you were saying.
I noticed that the notes not in PDF one.
Oh,
A PDF size, like PowerPoint form. So would you rather us like come to class and just more like listen and so that?
oh, it's a great question. For every lecture, I will post the PowerPoint slides. Every slide, I'm going to take out some of the jokes and stuff, but every slide will be there, and I've posted a PDF that has them all. And so some people open the PDF and make notes on that. Some people print them out and write notes on that, whichever works for you. My expectation is that you should come to class. If you come to class with them ready to annotate in one way or the other, then you should be good, right? I mean, so, and I'll always have the notes up before I cover that material in class. So, for example, the prologue, chapter 1 and chapter 2, which are going to be covered for the first midterm, they're up already. So you can see what I'm going to be yakking at you about. Yes, good. Maria.
You got to get the touch page and do your questions on the text that get the answer quick with.
on the D2L tests, they absolutely, that's what counts for your grade. And many of the Kahoot quizzes mysteriously appear on the tests. No one's sure quite how that happens, but it does. And so studying the answered Kahoot quizzes might not be a bad way to study for an exam. Did I answer? Other stuff about mechanics, because otherwise I'm going to start talking about the book. Yeah.
If we don't have like a valid excuse for not doing the class, and it's fine if you don't.
What would be an invalid excuse? I'm sipping margaritas and that's about. I'm going to my sister's wedding. That's a valid excuse.
Or just like going on vacation or something like that.
I don't test the limits. I mean, as long as there aren't like as long as you aren't going to go on 30 Thursdays in a row or something.
I was gonna say, and like if you're fine with losing the participation points for the weekly still get the lecture though, if we would just
Yeah, you'll get the lecture, but I mean, if you have a reason not be here, tell me that. And I guess I am relying on the idea that if it's really a totally pathetic excuse that you won't, but I don't know. Yeah, life happens, and don't do that too often. Okay, great question. Probably forgotten some other stuff. Your edition of the book does not have the learning objectives printed in it. The second edition does, but so you're going to have to get them from PowerPoint slides like here. So these are all the things that I want you to be able to do after you have read the prologue and listened to me talk about it, okay? And on the D2L site, I posted all the learning objectives for the entire book there. Did I add the new chapter? Anyway, they're all there, and you should look at that because it's going to, my guess is, as you look at them now, you can't answer most of them. By the time this course is over, you're going to be able to answer most of this, right? You're going to learn a ton. Hopefully it won't hurt too much, but right, it's pretty impressive. Okay, so these are the sorts of things that I want you to be able to do, right? Studying this material should enable you to talk about, these aren't the learning objectives. This is the order of stuff that we're going to talk about. Here, this, instead of saying chapter 8, it should say chapter 7.5. So that's the new chapter that's I'm going to sandwich between the old 7 and 8. Okay. And yeah, here are the learning objectives. Epistemology. Oh, sure. Last chance for questions about plumbing. I mean, not really, but I want to get them out of the way. Sorry. Mechanics. Epistemology is a philosophical study of knowledge and how it is acquired, right? That's all it means. And in the prologue, I talk about how, well, first of all, there are only, of all the things that people have ever written, so go back to the very beginning of history, people have been writing a bunch of stuff for a long time, and almost all of it's gone, right? So my book, 100 years from now, nobody will remember a thing about it. Nothing. There'll be no copies left. That's my guess, right? And that's true of most stuff that was written. But there's some stuff that was written 3,000-4,000 years ago, and we still have copies of it. And that's all the more astonishing because nobody had a Xerox machine, right? The only way to make a copy of something was painstaking work in one language, an alphabet, or script, or another. And so the only things that we have left from those days are things that generation after generation, people found to be important enough to copy before Gutenberg made that device of his, right? And so there's been a natural selection taking place. The only things that are left to us are the things that really made the grade in terms of meaning something to people. And you can say that not just for philosophical stuff, but religious stuff, right? I mean, the reason the Bible's with us is because people felt it spoke to them, right? And it's because of that we know that several thousand years ago, there were a group of people, primarily in Greece and related areas who were really revolutionary in their thinking. They didn't have any time for those ideas of the gods, etc. I mean, they just regarded those as myths that were, good storytelling devices. And they were trying to figure out how on earth is it that we're here? And not only that, how is it that we're here and we know how to do stuff? I mean, it's really a pretty fundamental mystery, right? Basically, what are humans and why are they here? And so among them were these guys, Plato and his teacher, Socrates, and I'll lump these two together. In Plato, in his various dialogues, he writes about what Socrates said, but Socrates never wrote anything down. In fact, Socrates didn't like books. He complained that this new invention of books was really bad for the human mind because it meant people wouldn't remember stuff anymore because they'd just go look it up. Somehow civilization continued, right? But Socrates didn't write anything down, but Plato was his devoted student and wrote down lots of the stuff that he told us. And they were revolutionary in their time, and they were just skeptics, right? They weren't cynics, those are a different branch, but they were very skeptical of anything, any idea. They questioned it. And that was the revolutionary thing. They didn't just accept what other people told them, didn't just accept what everybody said was true, didn't accept what the priest down at the temple said was true, right? They were trying to figure it all out themselves. And epistemology was one of the biggest mysteries for them. Hold on, got to catch up with myself. And Plato talks about an important parable. One of the things that they were skeptical about was that you could believe anything that your senses told you, because each of them at one time or another had hallucination. They already knew about visual illusions. They already knew, Aristotle talks about a way you can fool yourself by touching your nose with your fingers crossed to think that you only have one finger, right? Stuff like that. And they knew you can't rely on the senses. Or my other favorite quote from the Christmas Carol, right? Scrooge tells Jacob Marley, I don't know that you're here. You're just a bad bit of beef in my stomach, right? There's more of the gravy than grave about you, right? He says, you can't trust what your senses tell you. And the epitome of this distrust was related in Plato's parable of the cave. So he says, imagine this. Imagine that there are some people who grow up shackled inside a cave, and the only thing they can see is the cave wall in front of them, and all they can see on it are shadows that are moving around. And the shadows are being put there by people in the real world, moving back and forth between the wall and a fire or a source of light behind them. Everyone get that? So imagine that you've grown up there, and all your life, you can't see the people next to you. All you see are shadows, and you watch them move around, and you pay attention to what they're doing, and you learn stuff about, people ride horses and stuff like that, right? And, those people would have no idea of the real nature of the world. How the universe really works would be totally outside their ken, right? They couldn't know it. And he says, now, how about if you unshackle one of those people and you bring them up and you show them the whole works? Here's the whole scam, what we've been doing with you and your buddies, right? This is what's really going on, et cetera, et cetera. And you let them look around and, wow, I'm totally wowed at this. This has really opened my eyes, almost literally. And now you put them back with their fellows, and they tell their fellows what the nature of the world really is. Query: Would their co-inhabitants believe them, even for a moment? That guy is crazy. He's nuts. Plato says we are all shackled in a cave because the only information we can get is through our senses, and it's totally unreliable, and we have no idea what the real nature of the world is. Pretty revolutionary thinking, right? Refusing to accept things as they seem to be, knowing that they may not be the way they seem to be. And so the senses are unreliable. And given that, the fact that we have knowledge is all the more mysterious. For the ancients, they divided behavior into the sorts of behaviors animals do, which is emotional, and the sort of behaviors humans do because they use reasoning. So usually what they're usually gets translated from the Greek and Latin as reasoning. Man has reason and animals don't. Okay? This is going to be a familiar tune, and we're going to run into it over and over again, where people refuse to believe that we could have anything to do with those animals, right? We are so special, we got made separate, right? That's a very common idea. And so we're the ones with reason, and the animals don't. Okay? And Plato, Socrates is saying, how is that possible? And he talks about a story of, well, he asks us, if you start out in the world knowing absolutely nothing, how could you ever learn anything? Really, if you don't know anything, to jump ahead several centuries, if you have no notion of what space is, time, or causality, how can you learn anything? If you don't have anything like that, knowing ahead of time, it's just not possible. And Plato talks about a time Socrates meets a slave boy, right? No education, doesn't know how to read or write. And Socrates asks him a series of questions, drawing figures in the sand. And eventually that slave boy derives the Pythagorean theorem. And Socrates never tells him a thing. He just asks him a question, right? Draws it and asks him a question about that. Not only that, the slave boy ends up concluding that every right triangle in the world obeys the Pythagorean theorem. And he's never heard of Pythagoras, doesn't know anything about it. And so Socrates says, see, he already knew. He just didn't know that he knew. So the knowledge was already there inside him. And I just ask a series of questions and the knowledge comes out, and it turns out he knows that's there. And so Plato says, how is that possible? That the knowledge was inside him all along. And he comes up with a pretty radical solution. He says, it has to be that there's a soul inside him, and that soul must be eternal. It must have always existed. And it's packed with all this information that unfolds as the human reasons his way into the world. Right? Pretty radical, right? And as another example, it talks about the Platonic notion of forms with a capital F. It says, you can show people a bed or a dog, and you can show them a bed or dog that has never existed before. It is different from every other bed or dog that's ever existed before. And yet, as soon as you see it, they instantly say, oh, that's a bed. Or they'll see oh, that's a dog. I know what that is. And he said, is that possible? Right? No two dogs are alike, and yet people recognize it instantly. And Plato's solution is the eternal soul's got that information about what beds and dogs look like, right? So that for each object there is in the world, and even for certain concepts like love and faith, stuff like that, that for each concept in the world, there is in your eternal soul, there's embedded a form for that thing. And what happens when you see the world is you recognize that that thing is an imperfect reflection of the form. So none of these dogs are the same, and yet you instantly know they're dogs, even though they're in different poses and different colors and different shapes and different sizes, etc. And that's because they all fit with the ideal form of dog. And the only reason you can recognize dogs is because that too was in your eternal soul, right? The one that came into your body when you came into the world. How's that? This notion that understanding relies on rational thought is sometimes known as rationalism. And the philosophers who espoused it were known as the rationalists. And Plato, well before the Common Era, his philosophy was basically accepted by the whole world. And then in the 1500s, this guy, prominent among others, René Descartes, who we've heard about before, he says, I'm going to start philosophy all over again. I'm going to accept nothing that was there before, and I'm going to figure out how the world really is just using reasoning alone. And I'm going to start out with the one thing I know, right? And in Latin, he said it, cogito ergo sum. What was that? I think, therefore I am. And he says, that's all I know for sure, and I'm going to build on that. Now, in truth, she had read all those ancient philosophers, and he accepted it all wholesale. He was not as revolutionary as he thought he was, right? Because he's basically another rationalist. He more or less parrots pretty much everything that Plato said, including the unreliability of the senses. So in one famous letter he writes, he relates a time when he was working at his desk, working away at a manuscript, and suddenly woke up and realized, he had not been working at his desk. It looked just like his desk. It looked just like his room. He had been dreaming that he was working at his desk. And he said, how would you know? How do you know whether what you're doing now is a dream or not? By the way, some of you wake up and, you're confused. Tell me about it later. And so he agreed totally with Plato that senses are unreliable, and also agreed with Plato that information had to be inside you in the first place. So he's famous for several things. What's interesting about Descartes is that he's very modern in the sense that he's wanting to understand the machinery of behavior. What is it inside organisms that make them work? And this famous woodcut from one of his books shows an example where he's saying, the heat from a fire, it sends a message up to the brain, and the brain then reflects that information to cause the foot to withdraw. So basically, the flexion reflex that you read about. And the reason it's called a reflex is because he thought the power, the information, maybe even the hydraulics, he thought it might have been, hydraulics were a big thing in his era, in newfangled machines, that it was reflecting back, and that's why it's called a reflex, right? So he's very mechanical about things. He's trying to figure out the mechanism of it, but he's a man of his time, and he has to figure out how to reconcile that with the church. So he distrusts the senses, and he too feels like that the information was always in there, and that his job as a scholar is to try to uncover the information that was already inside him. You see how that's pretty similar to Plato and Socrates? And this is one of his quotes that I love. He said, I'm not sure that I learned anything. It's just I suddenly remember or recall how things are, right? And so he too thought it was inside him. And he too thought it was because of an eternal soul. Of course, for Descartes, 16th century France, 16th, 17th century France, totally Catholic culture, for Descartes, the eternal soul was also what he was learning about in church, the cathedral, and in the Bible, right? This eternal soul that was constantly trying to decide what to do, what's right and what's wrong. And that notion will continue through Judeo-Christian thought right up to this very day. By the time you get to the New Testament, you've got Paul saying, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Or as a comedian said, late 20th century, the devil made me do it, right? Or for most of them, it is that my body betrays me. I want to do right. I want to not have sex with that person, but my body makes me do it, right? I'm trapped by it. So as if the mind and the body were somehow two different spheres of influence. And Descartes totally bought this. And even though he thinks the body's a machine, he's got to figure out how the soul comes into this. And so in his notion, you probably know, he suggested, well, there's only one pineal gland and the soul is unitary. So maybe the soul is in the pineal gland and it's controlling the body. Think of it as a tiny little man in there in a room full of levers and wheels and knobs, and he's turning the wheels and knobs to make you do, whatever you're going to do. Everyone got that notion? And by the way, you put a little man in the pineal gland and you've solved the problem of the control of behavior, right? Totally solved. Oh, it's that little man. But wait a minute. You haven't solved anything. Now you got to figure out, well, why does the little man do what he does why does he turn those knobs, et cetera, right? You made no progress whatsoever. And so for Descartes, he felt that humans have a soul, and he noticed that animals show a lot of behavior too, and he had to explain, how do animals show all that behavior even though they don't have souls? And how did he know they don't have souls? Well, because the church told him that they don't have souls, right? They can't do right or wrong. They're just, in his words, he gets translated several different ways, they were just machines. Humans are special, we have a soul, and animals are just machines. And they only do what the machine is programmed to do. Mere automata. Mere automata. Oh, isn't that interesting? I'm going to be singing Hakuna Matata in a moment. Mere automata is what animals are. Just machines, gears, stuff like that. And people have a soul. And so he began this notion of dualism, that you consist of two different spheres. There is your physical body and there is your immortal soul. And it's your immortal soul that decides whether to do right or wrong. And it simply tells your body which thing to do. And it'll be your immortal soul, your body stays here. It's your immortal soul that will either go to heaven or hell. Right? And no worries for animals because they don't have a soul, so they don't go anywhere. When they're dead, they're just dead. But when you're dead, you've got a reward waiting for you. Now, okay, that's a solution of sorts, but it's not much different from having the little man there, right? If the soul is purely spiritual, right? Well, how does the spiritual soul maneuver any of the gears? I mean, it's like, you know those goofy ghost movies where the ghosts at one point can pass through walls and another point they can throw stuff at you? Well, how would that work? Are they material or not? And if they're not material, how could they throw anything? And for that matter, how could you see them? How could they reflect light? Likewise, if there's a soul in there that's controlling your body, how does it do that? And these days, most philosophers and all neuroscientists reject the notion of dualism. There can't be two different parts of you. The eternal part that can't be studied, doesn't leave any mark, can't be measured, and the body, right? So for most neuroscientists today, the behavior you show is a result of mechanical processes going on in your brain. It's a complicated machine, and it's not using gears and levers. It's got, chemicals and electrical stuff and all that stuff you've been reading about, but it's just a machine. And there's no extra thing in there, a spirit that's knocking around, doing other things and making decisions. How's that? And so you might think, looking back, you can see how so much of his thinking was totally shaped by trying to conform to the Catholic Church, right? So much of it. He's making animals different because they can't have a soul. He's got to come up with this terrible solution of dualism because there's got to be an eternal soul in there, even though he's thinking all the time about how the machinery of the body works. And even so, he was careful not to have any of his work published while he was alive, because he'd seen Galileo get in trouble for saying, that the earth moves. And he didn't want to follow, and Galileo just kind of barely missed getting killed for it. He was under house arrest for the rest of his life. And Descartes didn't want that kind of trouble. So he had it published. He was as vain as the rest of us, but posthumously. And this notion of, dualism, this two different ways of doing it, brings up something that you've probably run into before, the notion of a brain in a jar. Let's say I've got a brain and I found out some way to keep it alive and I stick it in a jar and I carefully control all the inputs to all the senses and I carefully monitor all the outputs to all the motor stuff. And I put it in a computer and I feed to the brain visual input, a classroom, right? A certain time of day, etc. And if the brain decides how to react, I send that information out there and have that take place in a simulation. How many of you know for sure that you're not a brain in a jar? Excellent answer. Not a one of them. How would you know? You can't know. And so that, for all you know, you're just a very complex subroutine going on inside some vast computer program somewhere. And as some wag pointed out, let me ask you a question. Do you think it will be possible someday to make a computer program where there are subroutines that are interacting with it and think they're real and think they're in a real world? How many of you think that's possible? Someday. I agree. Well, wait a minute. If that's possible, then sooner or later someone's going to do it, right? Somewhere. And wait a minute. But they won't just make one. Won't there be lots of simulations? Many simulations? They'll be fiddling around doing it. And if that's the case, if in fact there are many simulated universes, come on. What are the odds that you happen to be in the real universe and not one of the simulations? Yeah, good.
By that logic, since there is no simulation yet for you, then I think that this is not a simulation.
Well, you could say that, right? But since we haven't made one yet, but wait a minute. If we were in a simulation, we wouldn't know that someone had made a simulation, right? If in fact in the real universe, there
have to come up with it since the idea is doable.
Somebody had to come up with it, yeah. And maybe the only reason philosophers talk a lot about brains in a jar, and maybe the only reason philosophers came up with that is because that's what they were programmed to do. I know. Take heart. And yet almost all of us are hungry, right? Right now, because it's getting close to supper time. So this notion of the rationalists, that it isn't possible, it is not possible to learn anything if you start out knowing nothing. That's absolutely true. They're right? You can't, if you have nothing to start with, how could you ever learn anything? And yet you all learned all this stuff. So, in fact, in the first 7.5 chapters of this book, we're going to see how the nervous system starts putting itself together. And it is a very orderly and very precise and very complicated process. And every bit of it is being controlled by the genes you happen to inherit from your mom and dad. All of it. For one thing, none of the sensory organs even work yet. And yet, it's got to be put together pretty darn well early in the first trimester, or else the whole thing's going to die and be lost, right? So it's a highly structured, highly complex process that's going on, and all of it was dictated by the genes you happen to inherit. Oh, and where did those genes come from? Oh, well, if you say modern human beings, they arose, say, 5 million years ago, okay? And that the gene pool Has it changed much since then? Once cultures came around, there hasn't been much gene selection happening in our species, right? We've been pretty static. So when your brain put itself together in the first couple trimesters, right, as it did, every one of us, as it put itself together, it had no sensory input. It had only the fact that it had about 20,000 genes that worked more or less well. And, right? So, in fact, the beginnings of putting a brain together is due to, well, not an immortal soul, but it's due to DNA, genes. 20,000 genes or so that you inherited that work well enough to get you put together. And so, how is that different? I mean, and is it eternal? No. It's only been around about 5 million years. But wait, for Plato, if you'd told Plato 5 million, it's not eternal, it's only 5 million years, he would have laughed at you. What's the difference? We only live 100 years. 5 million years might as well be eternal, right? Because we can't even put our heads around that kind of span. How's that? So the rationalists were absolutely right. But then after chapter 7.5, when we get to chapter 8, we're going to learn about the empiricist philosophers, mostly British, who insisted that all information has to come through the senses. There's just no way you can know, what things look like unless you've got sensations putting that information in there. And you know what? They were right too. Wait a minute. How can they? One says it's all in there in the first place, and the other says it's got to come through the senses. How can they both be right? Well, then this guy, Immanuel Kant, he explained why they're both right. And as we go through the material, we'll understand that these philosophers who are dealing with epistemology, they didn't even know it, but they were in fact developmental neurobiologists. They didn't know, right, that they were trying to figure out how can something eternal get your nervous system started off in the right direction. And then how can that eternal starting point get refined by the input of information from your senses? How is that even possible? And so we're going to be talking about cells interacting with each other in this class, and we're going to be solving how epistemology works. We're going to be solving what the rationalists were talking about. We're going to see in terms of how cells interact with each other, what the empiricists were talking about, and we're going to understand how Kant, how the things he said had to be there in the first place. We're going to understand how the structure of the nervous system and the way it puts itself together shows that he was right too. Most philosophy departments have an introductory course in philosophy where you talk about the rationalists and empiricists and manual. And now you don't need to take that course because I just explained it. Oh, well, wait, there might be a bit more involved. Okay, so that's the big picture. That's where we're going. And how best to get there with a last minute Kahoot. Ah. Ah. Wait a minute. You know what? I'm just doing the math. Question that. You know what? Stop.
we'll do this at the beginning of the next class. I want to have time. First of all, I got to give out the book by the part of the group. So I promise we will do this later. So time for additional questions about. No, I'm not going to give blow pops to everybody. That's not. Come on, I'll go broke. Questions about the course? Yes, excellent. Did you tell me your name?
My name's Tarika.
Say it again. Tarika. Okay. Yeah. What's the question?
It's more about like what we just talked about. So, how like what we're talking about like what if you are in simulations? How would death be explained? That
How would death? The subroutine comes to an end,
is it or like what about
or
like when somebody's walking around, they get hit by a car? Let's say like it wasn't like like due to like some degenerate disease back in here, the brain in the jar, the say it's dying, it's just born.
well, the brain in the jar. Of course, it's got to have some sort of life support system going on. Maybe if at the end of one program they turn off the life support system and the brain slowly fades. And of course, that's assuming there's a physical brain in a physical jar. But if in fact it's just a subroutine, that subroutine comes to an end and the rest of the program goes on. I mean, yeah, hopefully you'll all lose sleep about this if you haven't already. Yes. What's your name? Hannah. I'm sorry. Say. I'm despite the hearing, I'm a little hard of hearing, and despite the hearing aids, you kind of have to speak up.
I asked, what about like the doctor? Like,
Well, so are you thinking that would disprove that there's a simulation that we're going on? The programmer put that in there because he was just feeling mischievous that day. Let's every once in a while have them think, oh, I've done this before, when they've never done that. Easy. I mean, think of more of these things, and it's totally possible. Someone else had a hand up, I thought. Oh yeah, good.
and is this a quick picture of the learning investments?
Yeah.
It's scientists accept dualism.
Mhm.
You mentioned that there's just I think
Yeah, for most neuroscientists, I mean, what's the business of neuroscience? It is trying to understand how the brain controls behavior, right? How it is affected by behavior and controls behavior. And if you start suggesting that there must be a ghost in there, so-called ghost in the machine, a spirit in there that's moving the knobs around, well, then you're done, because the ghost by its very nature can't be measured, can't be monitored, can't be manipulated. So if that's the case, there's no point in doing neuroscience, right? Because you've just admitted defeat. Oh, there's a soul that's making all the decisions, and I got no way of studying it. So, well, but like everyone else, neuroscientists like to have stuff to do. So, and by the way, I should say, for all I know, there is a soul, right? I don't mean to make fun of that. I mean, if there is a soul, how would I know? I got no way of studying it, I can't disprove that such a thing exists, right? And, another place related to neuroscience where this happened was in mental illness. For centuries, the explanation for mental illness was that there was a demon in there or a bad spirit or something. And so, why would you ever bother making dopamine antagonists? How would that have any effect on a spirit, right? That's sort of so that in the New Testament, when Jesus encounters a guy who's kind of crazy, he asks him, basically, what's wrong with you? Who are you? And the guy says, my name is Legion, for we are many, not just one demon, lots of them. And Jesus drives them all into the swine, who then run off the cliff of the edge of the cliff and dies. And now the guy's cured because he just had to get all those demons out of him, right? Most neuroscientists are trying to take a different approach. So I did not say there's no eternal soul. I did not say there's no spirit inside you. What I said is I have no idea. Totally agnostic. It'll be a little bit annoying. I grew up reading the Bible and I read it again a few years ago, and so I really love it. Yeah, you'll see. It's you'll get sick of it, but they're cool stories. All right, so I think we've now reached our time. Yes, we're past. Okay, so see you Thursday here, and we'll start 5 minutes later than.
Fine. Yes, I'm good night.